For over a century, my family protected that lake like it was blood, not just land, power. My great grandfather built the dam with his bare hands and iron will. That rusted control wheel wasn't decoration, it was authority, it was leverage, and it was ours. Then came Karen. Not loud, not obvious, smiling, calculating, the most wicked HOA president this town had ever seen. We signed what looked like a civilized agreement. They could build on the far side, limited homes, tree buffer, strict preservation rules. On paper, it sounded respectful, balanced, fair. Karen called it progress. At first, I believed her. Construction noise echoed across the lake, but I trusted the contract. We had history, we had proof, we had control. Then the rumors started. Not homes, a resort, luxury cabins, tourist cash. I crossed the lake at sunrise, and what I saw felt like betrayal carved into earth. The entire shoreline was stripped raw, trees flattened, mud bleeding into the water, and lined up like cheap plastic toys were 109 identical cabins crammed to the edge. 109. They didn't bend the agreement, they butchered it. When I confronted Karen, she didn't flinch. She smiled and said, their lawyers found a loophole. A loophole. That's what she called generational destruction. The town council, bought by projected tax revenue. I stood at the dam that night, staring at the old iron wheel. They thought they outsmarted my family. They forgot one thing, the water doesn't belong to them. Karen celebrated early. Champagne on the unfinished dock, drone footage, promotional videos calling it Lakeside Paradise. She walked those muddy lots like a queen surveying conquered land. Meanwhile, she never once asked about the dam. That was her fatal mistake. Buried in the original agreement, in language so dry her attorneys skimmed past it, was one unshakable fact. We retained sole authority over lake level management. For safety, for structural control, for environmental protection. Ironclad. And Karen signed it. When the weather forecast predicted a heavy storm front, I didn't panic. I prepared. I reviewed flood maps, soil absorption data, historic rainfall records. I calculated the exact threshold that would raise the lake safely on my side, but not so safely on theirs. The trees they clear cut once absorbed runoff. Without them, that shoreline had become a bowl. They built their empire inside it. The storm rolled in after midnight. Thunder masked the groan of iron as I turned the dam's control wheel for the first time in years. The spillway narrowed, water pressure shifted, nothing illegal, nothing reckless, just controlled retention. By dawn, rain stopped. The lake had risen. Across the water, Karen's paradise looked different. Lawns were gone. Docks floated crooked. The first row of cabins sat ankle-deep in murky water. Phones were ringing. Guests were screaming. Contractors were scrambling. And Karen? She called me in hysterics. I calmly reminded her, lake levels fluctuate during heavy rainfall. Safety protocols required adjustment. Everything was documented. Everything was legal. And the water wasn't done rising. Drop a like, share this story, and subscribe if you believe greed always meets consequences. Tell me where you're watching from. Karen didn't scream the second week. She negotiated. Emergency HOA meetings, legal threats, environmental consultants. She even tried charm, inviting me to revisit the spirit of cooperation. I declined, because the spirit she buried was still floating in 2 feet of lake water. The storm had passed, but I never reopened the spillway fully. Not dangerously, not recklessly, just enough to maintain what rainfall had already justified. The shoreline they clear-cut had no roots to stabilize soil, no trees to absorb overflow. The cabins they rushed to build sat on softened ground that had once been forest. They created their own floodplain. By week 3, the damage turned ugly. Moisture crawled up drywall like a living thing. Foundations shifted millimeter by millimeter. Insurance adjusters walked through cabins in rubber boots. Mold reports began circulating online. Vacation bookings collapsed overnight. Then the media arrived. Luxury resort flooded before grand opening. Karen stood in front of cameras blaming unprecedented weather patterns. But locals knew the truth. The lake had been stable for decades until 109 cabins tried to choke it. Investors pulled out, contractors demanded payment, homeowners began asking how the HOA approved construction so close to fluctuating water levels. That's when Karen realized something worse than financial loss. She had no legal ground. The contract protected my dam rights without limitation, as long as safety standards were met. And every adjustment I made was documented, measured, justified. She tried to threaten a lawsuit. Her attorneys quietly advised against it, because discovery would expose everything. and Karen's empire was starting to smell like mildew. The grand opening banners never came down. They dissolved. By month two, the first row of cabins was condemned. Inspectors posted bright notices on warped doors. The ground beneath them had shifted beyond repair. What was marketed as premium waterfront access had become permanent submersion. Karen stopped smiling. HOA members who once applauded her vision now demanded audits. Emergency assessments revealed something devastating. They had over-leveraged community funds to finance the expansion. Tourism revenue was supposed to save them. Instead, it drowned them. The bankruptcy filing hit like thunder on a clear day. Headlines were ruthless. Residents who trusted the HOA felt betrayed. Property values dipped. Lawsuits emerged. Not against me, but against Karen and the board for reckless development decisions. At the final town meeting she attended, her voice shook. Not from anger, from humiliation. When foreclosure proceedings began, no investors stepped in. The land was deemed environmentally unstable for development. Eventually, it was transferred to a conservation trust. The cabins were demolished, concrete foundations were broken apart and removed. Nature returned quietly. Grasses pushed through scarred soil. Young saplings took root along the shoreline. The lake expanded slightly, deeper, calmer, untouchable. Sometimes, when the water is clear, you can still see faint outlines beneath the surface. A reminder: I didn't destroy Karen. She built her downfall herself. I simply honored the contract and let the lake remember who truly owned it. If this story opened your eyes, like, share, and subscribe. And tell me where you're watching from. Let's see how far the lake's warning travels.